Okay, so now we enter into Act 3, Scene 4, which is quite a long scene compared to the previous ones we've just gone through. So if you want to turn to the start of this scene, it's on page 106 of your book, and I'll read for you a summary that you might want to copy down at the start of this scene. Okay, the banquet is well underway when one of the murderers appears and reports to Macbeth. Macbeth is delighted with the news that Banquo is dead, but is dismayed to learn that Fleance has escaped. When Macbeth rejoins the party, he loses all composure in front of his guests when he sees Banquo's ghost. Lady Macbeth asks the guests to leave. Macbeth announces his intention to visit the Weird Sisters to get more information. Okay, so there'll be no new characters in this scene, but it will open up inside the Forest Castle where a banquet is prepared and guests are attending. You know your own degrees. Sit down. At first and last, the hearty welcome. The Lord sit down. Thanks to your Majesty. Ourself will mingle with society and play the humble host. Our hostess keeps her state, but in best time we will require her welcome. Pronounce it for me, sir, to all our friends, for my heart speaks they are welcome. Enter the first murderer at the door. See they encounter thee with their hearts' thanks. Both sides are even. Here I'll sit in the midst by large in mirth, and none will drink a measure the table round. Aside to the first murderer, there's blood upon thy face. 'Tis Banquo's then. 'Tis better thee without than he within. Is he dispatched?
My lord, his throat is cut. That I did for him.
Thou art the best of the cutthroats, yet he's good that did the like for Fleance. If thou didst it, thou art the nonpareil.
Most royal sir, Fleance is escaped.
Then comes my fit again. I had else been perfect, whole as the marble, founded as the rock, as broad and general as the casing air. But now I am cabined, cribbed, confined, bound to saucy doubts and fears. But Banquo's safe?
Ay, my good lord, safe in a ditch he bides, with 20 trenched gashes on his head, the least a death to nature.
Thanks for that. There the grown serpent lies. The worm that's fled hath nature that in time will venom breed. No tease for the present. Get thee gone. Tomorrow we'll hear ourselves again. Exit the first murderer. My royal lord, you do not give the cheer. The feast is sold that is not often vouched. While 'tis a making, 'tis given with welcome. To feed were best at home. From thence the sauce to meat is ceremony, meeting with bear without it. Sweet remembrancer, now good digestion wait on appetite, and health on both.
May it please your highness, sit.
Enter Banquo's ghost. Here we had now our country's honour roofed, were the graced person our Banquo present. Who may I rather challenge for unkindness than pity for mischance?
His absence, sir, lays blame upon his promise. Please it to your highness to grace us with your royal company.
The table's full.
There is a place reserved, sir.
Where?
My good lord, what is it that moves your highness?
Which of you have done this?
What, my good lord?
Beth speaks to Banquo's ghost. Thou canst not say I did it. Never shake thy gory locks at me.
Gentlemen, rise. His highness is not well.
Sit, worthy friends. My lord is often thus, and hath been from his youth. Pray you, keep seat. The fit is momentary. Upon a thought he will again be well. If much you note him, you shall offend him, and extend his passion, freed and regard him not. Aside to Macbeth. Are you a man? Ay, and a bold one that dare look on that which might appall the devil. Oh, proper stuff! This is the very painting of your fear. This is the air-drawn dagger which you said led you to Duncan. Oh, these flaws and starts!
impostors to true fear, would well become a woman's story at a winter's fire, authorized by her grandam. Shame itself! Why do you make such faces? When all's done, you look but on a stool. Prithee, see there, behold, look, lo, how say you? Why, what care I, if thou canst nod, speak too? If charnel houses and our graves must send those that we bury back, our monuments shall be the moors of kites. Exit Banquo's ghost. What, quite unmanned in folly? I stand here, I saw him. Fly for shame! Blood hath been shed ere now, i'th the olden time, ere humane statute purged the gentle wheel. Ay, and since too, murders have been performed too terrible for the ear. The time has been, that, when the brains were out, the man would die, and there an end. But now they rise again, with 20 mortal murders on their crowns, and push us from our stools. This is more strange than such a murder is. My lord, your noble friends do lack you. I do forget. Do not muse at me. My most worthy friends, I have a strange infirmity, which is nothing to those that know me. Come, love and health to all. Then I'll sit down. Give me some wine. Fill full. Enter the ghost of Banquo. I drink to the general joy of the whole table, and to our dear friend Banquo, whom we miss. Would he were here. To all and him we thirst, and all to all. Our duties and the pledge. Macbeth sees the ghost. Avaunt, and quit my sight. Let the earth hide thee. Thy bones are marrowless, thy blood is cold. Thou hast no speculation in those eyes which thou dost glare with. Think of this, good peers, but as a thing of custom. 'Tis no other, only it spoils the pleasure of the time. What man dare, I dare. Approach thou like the rugged Russian bear, the armed rhinoceros, or the Hyrcan tiger. Take any shape but that, and my firm nerves shall never tremble, or be alive again. And dare me to the desert with thy sword. If trembling I inhabit then, protest me, the baby of a girl. Hence, horrible shadow, unreal mockery, hence! Exit the ghost. Why so, being gone, I am a man again. Pray you, sit still. You have displaced the mirth, broke the good meeting, with most admired disorder. Can such things be, and overcome us like a summer's cloud, without our special wonder? You make me strange, even to the disposition that I owe, when now I think you can behold such sights, and keep the natural ruby of your cheeks, when mine is blanched with fear. What sights, my lord? I pray you, speak not. He grows worse and worse. Questioning enrages him. At once good night. Stand not upon the order of your going, but go at once. Good night, and better health attend his majesty. A kind night to all. Exeunt all but Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. It will have blood, they say. Blood will have blood. Stones have been known to move, and trees to speak. Augurs and understood relations have, by magpies and shoofs and rooks brought forth, the secretest man of blood. What is the night? Almost at odds with morning. Which is which? How sayest thou that Macduff denies his person at our great bidding? Did you send to him, sir? I hear it by the way, but I will send. There's not a one of them but in his house I keep a servant freed. I will to-morrow, and betimes I will, to the weird sisters. More shall they speak, for now I am bent to know. But the worst means, the worst. For mine own good, all causes shall give way. I am in blood. Stepped in so far, that should I wade no more, returning were tedious as a go o'er strange things I have in head, that will to hand, which must be acted ere by that may be scanned. You lack the season of all natures, sleep. Come, will to sleep. My strange and self-abuse is the initiate fear that wants hard use. We are yet but young indeed.
Okay, so that's the end of Act 3, Scene 4. And again, there you see a return to lots of Christian mythology as well as supernatural mythology. Now, if you remember our discussions we've had previously, King James had a strong link to both. So, being the first king of both England and Scotland gave him a lot of power, and he carried with him a lot of beliefs from the Scottish monarchy, such as the divine right of a king. He was also devoutly religious, and he commissioned the first ever novelized Bible that combined both the Old and New Testament. That is the Bible we recognize today and which many Christian and Catholic religions follow. The other thing, however, that's less noted about him was his full belief in witches, and the other book he commissioned, which was a demonology. So he believed it, because he had a divine right to king, that he was above the laws of God. He certainly did not believe that his subjects were above those laws, and as such he sentenced many people he believed that were practicing witchcraft to death. But he believed he was allowed to study that spirituality, and he also, on top of being a Christian, studied witchcraft and sought to understand it. And so there's a marrying of those two beliefs throughout Macbeth, and they're both mentioned in this scene. So we'll turn to page 106, and I'll read through some notes and annotations that you can make about both themes and vocabulary. So we'll start to line number 1, where Macbeth says, "You know your own degrees, sit down." So degrees here is referring to the different ranks that lords in feudal England and Scotland would have had, and lords were expected to sit according to those ranks. So the most important lord would sit closest to the king, down to the least important. Then we'll go down to line 5, and Macbeth is talking about Lady Macbeth, and he says, "Our hostess keeps her state." Now, a state was a type of royal chair with a canopy. And if I can find a picture for you, I'll hold it up. So, oops. That there is a picture of a state, a royal chair with a canopy. So he says that Lady Macbeth will stay in that chair. And go to the next page, page 108. Macbeth starts talking to the murderer who comes. Now, you could interpret his asking what happened as a pointer to him not being the third murderer. Maybe it was Lady Macbeth or somebody else, or maybe it was just a random, or maybe he's pretending not to know, so the first and second murderer don't suspect it was him. And he says to the first murderer, "Thou art the non-pareil," and non-pareil there means without equal. We'll go down to line 23, and Macbeth says, well, at this point he's found out that Fleance lives, and he describes how he would have felt if Fleance was dead, saying, "I had else been perfect, whole as marble, founded as the rock," and then he says, "as broad and general as the casing air," which means he would have been as free as the sky. But then he goes on to say how caged he feels because Banquo is alive. We'll continue down to line 27. The first murderer is describing what happened to Banquo, and he says, "with 20 trenched gashes," trenched means cut. And then we'll go all the way down to the bottom of the page, 108, to Lady Macbeth speaking. And we'll break down her whole speech there when she's saying to Macbeth, "You do not give the cheer, the feast is sold." So what is she saying there? She's saying, if you don't stand up and give a royal cheer or a royal welcome frequently, this feast will feel like one that is paid for at a public eating space. So almost like nothing special. And then she says that ceremony is what makes banquet special. So from thence, the sauce to the meat is ceremony. So she's using the metaphor of sauce going on meat as ceremony to a feast. So ceremonies are what make the feast special. We'll go across to page 110, and at line 40 on that page we see dramatic irony. So you can imagine how the original King's Men, Shakespeare's company, would have portrayed this. Perhaps the actor portraying Macbeth would have been facing the other way, whilst the actor who's dressed up as Banquo's ghost would have snuck in, so that the audience watching would have known that Banquo was there, but Macbeth and the actor playing Macbeth would be pretending that they could not see him. And Macbeth says in line 40, "We now our country's honour roofed, were the grace person of our Banquo present." So in the plain English, he's saying we would have all of the noblest men of Scotland here if Banquo was present. And that's, of course, dramatic irony because the audience knows that he is. And then as he turns around and he asks where he's going to sit, and Lord Ross, who we've seen a few times now, he insists that there's a seat right there, but of course that's where the actor dressed up as Banquo's ghost would be sitting, and Macbeth would take a while, and you could almost imagine a very gothic, gory scene where the actor turns around and reveals that his face is covered with blood and all of those gashes that the first murderer was describing. And as Macbeth notices that this is Banquo's ghost, we see the reoccurrence of multiple themes and imagery. We see the theme of madness reoccur, which Lady Macbeth herself links to the vision that Macbeth has before murdering Duncan, where he sees the dagger. But we also see the idea of visions and also the imagery of blood. So we can see now that both Duncan's murder and Banquo's murder were particularly bloody. They weren't strangled or smothered or poisoned, but cut up and stabbed, so blood got everywhere. And this is confirmed on line 50 when Macbeth starts talking to the vision ghost, and he says, "Never shake thy gory locks at me." And there's an example of the imagery of blood, and gory locks means bloody hair, so shaking his bloody head or hair. Okay, across to page 112, and we'll go down to line 62, where Lady Macbeth says to Macbeth, "This is the very painting of your fear." And painting here means a mere representation or something that's not real. So this is something that is not real that you are fearing right now. And then she says, "Oh, these flaws and starts." So that is line 63. So flaws and starts usually refers to wind, sudden gusts of wind, if you can think about wind starting and stopping. But she's referring to Macbeth's passion or his sudden fits. So she's describing his sudden fits. And then she says, "Impostors to true fear would well become a woman's story." So this idea of a ghost being here would be better suited to an old wives' tale, told at a winter's fire, authorized by an old grandma. And then when she says shame itself, that means shame on you. So that's line 66. And then we'll go down to what Macbeth says in response. And he's trying to get her to see. So he says, "See there, behold, look low," trying to get her to see the ghost. So we know that from Lady Macbeth and the other men at the table, that they are unable to see the ghost that Macbeth is seeing. And he's saying that basically death is conquerable. So he says, "If thou canst not, speak too." So say so as well. And then he says, "If charnel houses," so charnel houses is a word for something like a crypt or a sepulchre. So it's a place where human bones would have been stored. So think like an old graveyard. So if charnel houses and our graves must send those that we bury back, our monuments shall be the maws of kites. So maws meaning mouths, and kites are referring to a kind of carrion bird similar to a crow that would have eaten dead bodies. So he's saying there's nothing to stop birds from eating the bodies, so there's no point to bury people. Okay, we'll go across to page 114, There's one thing I want to point out here, which is line 76, where Macbeth says, "Ere humane statute purged the gentle wheel." So this has a lot of unfamiliar language in it. So ere means here. And he's actually referring to the past. So here in the past, humane statute refers to human laws or laws of humanity. So here in the past, human laws, purged means get rid of, and gentle wheel means conflict. So here in the past, human laws used to get rid of this ongoing conflict. So the idea of having to do a string of murders in order to cover up the first one. And Lady Macbeth on this page manages to get the laws to calm back down and convinces them to drink and pretend that nothing's wrong. But of course, then the ghost re-enters, and we'll go to page 116. When Macbeth sees the ghost, he says, "Avaunt." This is line 92, which means get out. And then he describes the ghost in a gory way. He says, "Thy bones are marrowless, thy blood is cold, thou hast no speculation." And speculation there means sight, so it's unable to see. On line 102, he talks about things that are fearful that he would fear less than this ghost, including a Russian bear, an armed rhinoceros, and lastly a Hyrcan tiger. And that's referring to an Iranian tiger, which was a symbol of ferocity. And that's making the point that he would fear these fierce animals less than this ghost. And then he challenges the ghost to single combat by saying, "And dare me to the desert with thy sword." And then he says, "If I protest," so protest me, the baby of a girl. So if I protest, I will be a little girl. And we'll go down to line 112 at the bottom of the page, when the ghost has exited, and Macbeth tells Lady Macbeth, "You make me strange," which means you cause me to doubt. And he's basically saying, you're causing me to doubt what I see because you look normal, and you wouldn't have the natural ruby of your cheeks, which he says further down, if you had seen that ghost. So you would be white in the face. So we'll go across to page 118, and we'll go to the middle of the page when everyone's left except for Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. And Macbeth says, "It will have blood," and he means blood will have blood. And that would be a great line to highlight and record as a quote. Blood will have blood. It's very easy to remember, and it draws together a new theme that we're going to see crop up throughout the rest of the play, and that's the theme of revenge, and it's linked to the symbol of blood. So we've seen blood on the image of the dagger, that symbolic dagger that Macbeth saw in a vision before he killed Duncan. We also saw blood and the idea of golden blood linked to true royalty and Duncan's succession to the throne. And now we're seeing blood linked to the idea of revenge. And this is going to be exemplified most prominently when Macbeth sends more murderers to kill Macduff. And so Macduff is going to be brought in to the act of revenge against Macbeth. So far we know that Malcolm and Donalbain seek revenge against Macbeth. We know from Macbeth's own confessions that many of the friends that he and Banquo shared, as well as Fleance, would want to exact revenge against him. And now, later on, we'll see how Macduff will want to exact revenge on Macbeth. And all of those needs for revenge are linked to blood and the blood that Macbeth has spilt. And then he starts talking about the supernatural. And here's where King James's belief in studying witchcraft and spirituality and the occult comes in, because Macbeth says, stones have been known to move. And what he means there is that gravestones have been known to speak and tell things to people. And he says, and trees to speak. Augurs is referring to people who are able to read those signs. So people that are knowledgeable of witchcraft, or people who practice that occult, dark, evil side of spirituality, are able to speak to gravestones and trees, kind of like a medium or a psychic, and find out the truth about murders. And so that definitely would have been a belief close to King James's heart, remembering that King James was the original intended audience for this play. Then he refers to maggot pies and shoofs and rooks. So maggot pies is the old word for magpies, and both shoofs and rooks are also types of birds. And so it's the idea that also these birds that are usually linked to witchcraft or dark arts can also be spoken to and tell the truth about murder and who shed the blood. Then Lady Macbeth uses the phrase almost at odds with morning when Macbeth asks what time is the night, and she says it's as close to morning as you can get. So we can imagine it maybe is like 3-4 a.m. And then Macbeth in line 132 gives us some interesting information. When he's talking about Macduff, he says, "I keep a servant feed." And that means I keep a servant spying on him and his family. So we already know he is very suspicious of Macduff. Now lastly, on page 120, Macbeth tells him to sleep, which confirms what he predicted in Act 2, that Macbeth will sleep no more. He has not been sleeping. And he says, "Calm will to sleep, my strange and self-abuse is the initiate fear that wants hard use." And self-abuse there means lying to himself or self-deception. Okay, and that's the end of this scene. So I want to propose one thought here that many scholars think is revealed in this scene and the next couple when Macbeth indeed does go and seek out the Weird Sisters like he says he's going to do in order to get more information about how his kingship is going to go. So the thought that people have is that the power the witches have over Macbeth comes only from within him and his own belief in the supernatural. And so without that belief in the supernatural, the witches would have no control in this circumstance. So I want you to think of that and reflect on that over the next two scenes, whether or not the witches truly have power over Macbeth and these events, or it's all his doing and his own belief in their power.